Hello, Nashville. This talk is called Two Sides of the Same Coin. In it, I'm going to try to explain why most people miss Bitcoin, why they fail to see it. It's going to be very high level, very beginner friendly. I'm going to move fast. I got 90 slides. I got 15 minutes. Let's roll. So this is my complex framework. There are two sides to it, money and networks. But herein lies the problem, because Bitcoin only exists in the middle. I'm going to take you through this framework really quickly, and we're going to start with the side of money. So here's an example of trading one good or service for another, a process known as barter. If I have 6 items, these 6 items have 15 different exchange rates between them, or pricing relationships. If I increase that number to just 500 items, well, I now have almost 125,000 individual exchange rates. For context, your average Walmart has about 140,000 items. So you can see that barter is an infeasible system for a complex economy of millions of people and billions of items. So what do? How do we solve this problem? Well, we use a single common good in the middle of all transactions. It's what we denominate prices in, and we term this good money. Now, language is a helpful analogy here. If I only speak English, I can only communicate with other English speakers. All English speakers make up a network. We use the English language protocol, and the largest language protocol will attract the most people. It'll have the most knowledge, the most information, and if you don't know this language, you are incentivized to learn it. Well, it's the same for money as a language for communicating value. Now, the largest monetary network, well, it's in your interest to be a part of it, because that will have the most people, the most specialization, the widest range of goods and services, and at the best prices. So money's not some static thing. It's been many different things in many different places at many different times, but we always upgrade in one direction, and that's in terms of salability. What is salability? Well, it's the ease with which something can be sold. Now, there are 2 dimensions to salability. Salability across time, so sending value into the future, and salability across space, sending value across distance. Now, for a while, humans converged on gold. It was a bottom-up process determined by the free market, and it happened for a couple of reasons. Firstly, gold's indestructible. If you could secure it, it would persist into the future and wait for you. It also had to be mined, meaning there was proof of work. It couldn't be synthesized from other materials, so it had a fairly predictable rate of inflation, and it had a fairly reliable way of preserving value. But this is King Henry VIII of England, and he wants to fight wars with France and Scotland. But the only problem is, he hasn't got any money. So what does he do? He debases the currency. Pretty brutal, right, if you're saving in this? But hey, what do you expect? The guy beheaded 2 of his 6 wives. So metal debasement has been a problem for many people because rulers can capitalize on the fact that it's very difficult to validate for the individual. But Anil, I don't use gold. I use the dollar, and I certainly didn't choose the dollar. Right you are, good sir. You did not choose the dollar. It was forced upon you, and that's due to gold's second major flaw. You see, as human mobility advanced, gold could not keep up. So we entrusted custodians who issued redeemable pieces of paper. Those custodians became centralized. They were honeypots, captured by governments who issued their own paper notes before breaking the link with gold. These pieces of paper would freely float, you would be forced to use them, and we would sacrifice preserving value over time for the convenience of sending money over space, while wishing for the best of both worlds. So why would governments do this? Well, if I can print money, I'm not relying on collecting taxes from you. I don't need your permission. I'll run a deficit, leave the problem for the next guy. If only there was a form of money that could protect against these two insidious forms of behavior. To figure out exactly how this might be possible, we need to look at the other side of our framework. And I'm going to take you through a crash course in networks. So networks are how we move things from point A to point B. We use them to move goods, we use them to move people, energy, and information. And networks are the actual infrastructure that facilitate those movements. Networks are made up of nodes that connect to one another. They may also include hubs when direct connections don't exist, are infeasible, or uneconomical. You could think of a major airport linking out to regional hubs. You could think of your heart pumping blood to your vital organs. Or a local area network sending packages of data between connected devices. But for the rest of this talk, I am going to focus on networks that move information. And in order to move information, we must first record it. We have to write it down. Because we may want to communicate it across distance, we may want to store it over time. This is my favorite example of a network that moves information. It's called the Chap Telegraph. It is a tower-like structure with movable arms, and depending on how those arms are positioned, it can communicate information. Now, these towers would be placed within line of sight of one another, and the reason they were used is because they were faster than horseback, especially over rugged terrain. Though there is one critical flaw. They had path dependency. That means if you took out one tower, your message cannot get through. Nevertheless, by 1844, France had built over 500 of these towers, connecting 29 cities all through the central hub of Paris. But on the other side of the Atlantic, Professor Samuel Morse, that very same year, is sending the first long-distance message by electrical telegraph. Now, he was able to do so because a few years earlier, he had created a system for encoding text as binary. Now he can just use electrical currents to transmit text. So at the time, sending a message from London to New York took about 12 days via physical mail. So it represents a huge opportunity. And by 1858, the first transatlantic electrical telegraph cable was laid, allowing Queen Victoria, stationed in Ireland, to communicate with US President James Buchanan, who was in Eastern Canada. And they would have the first transatlantic conversation in real time. So why do we choose new networks? Well, it's not because they're new and shiny. They have to offer some benefit across one or a combination of dimensions, because they have to account for the switching costs of users and the infrastructure costs of the builders. The electrical telegraph was chosen because it had significant advantages in speed. Now, when this happens, as engineering advances, as we find cheaper, faster, smarter ways of doing things, the incumbent gets obsoleted. So, what the electrical telegraph did to the Chap telegraph, the telephone did to the electrical telegraph. What the cell phone did to the telephone, and what the smartphone did to the cell phone. And if we zoom out, this is the broader thing that was happening. We moved from physical communication networks to wired to wireless. And the process of creative destruction keeps getting narrower and narrower, or it occurs in a shorter and shorter time window. But even with all this innovation, we have the same problem. If I want to send information across thousands of miles, I send a digital file. If I want to send it across thousands of years, I etch it into stone. But what's the equivalent of digital stone? For some insight, we're going to ask this man, Johannes Gutenberg. You see, before the printing press, books were copied by hand, mostly monks. For that reason, books were heavily moderated in their content. They were expensive, very labor-intensive, and literacy rates were low. Enter the printing press. It mechanized a manual process. Now, less labor is required. The unit cost per book plummets. And we see an explosion in the number of books throughout Europe and a corresponding explosion in literacy rates. But let's look at the hardware requirements of the printing press. And as you will see, they're all fairly common pieces. If you had the means, there was nothing to stop you from building your own once you knew the specs. In short, it was permissionless technology. And now let's look at the pieces that make up a Bitcoin node, or a full node, or a validating node. And we've got a CPU, some RAM, a hard drive. You're going to need to download the Bitcoin protocol, and that's going to be the language that nodes use to communicate. You'll need an internet connection and a power supply. But two of the most expensive parts that make up a node, storage and compute, keep getting cheaper over time thanks to Moore's law. And as a digital network, you want to ride the wave of Moore's law. Why? Well, it means more people can run nodes over time. And if more people can run nodes, the network becomes more decentralized, it becomes more censorship resistant, it becomes more useful, and it will move more value. So, all information-freeing innovations, if they're going to proliferate, they need to be easy to replicate. And they scare people. Rulers will try to stop them, but the lesson is always the same. You do not ban information-freeing technologies. You only ban yourself from them. Your neighbors accrue the benefits, they upgrade, you get left in the past. So remember this slide from earlier? All English speakers make up a network amongst us. Well, it's the same with Bitcoin nodes speaking a common accounting language. And if one node's record differs from all others, they no longer speak the same language. They cannot communicate with the network. So Bitcoin is Medusa for a couple of reasons. Shut down one node, many more will surely pop up in good time. And number two, every valid transaction that the network sees is immediately turned to stone and stored for eternity. And because Bitcoin is digital money, it only exists on a digital network, which means recording information is now the same as storing wealth. Ask yourself this question, ladies and gentlemen. If you are going to store your wealth on a digital network, what level of confidence would you need to have in the reliability of that network? Because if you are going to own digital gold, you want it recorded in digital stone, verifiable by all. So to summarize, if you only view Bitcoin through the lens of money, you will believe it will be stopped, as gold was. If you view it solely through the lens of networks, you will believe it will be obsoleted, just as the Chap Telegraph was. When you need to zoom out, use both of your eyes, and only then will you see that Bitcoin has already won. Thank you very much.